The fluorescent lights of Sunny Day Cafe buzzed overhead as Vanessa Sterling counted the crumpled bills in her palm for the third time. $23.47. The reality hit her stomach like cold concrete. This was it. This was what remained after rent, after utilities, after the bare minimum groceries that would carry her through the next week until her cleaning service paid her again. She sat in the corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the lunch crowd flow through downtown Los Angeles. Business people in expensive suits ordered elaborate meals without checking prices. College students laughed over shared appetizers. Everyone seemed to move through life with a certainty about their next meal that Vanessa envied deeply. The man at the counter caught her attention because of his stillness. While everyone else rushed and chattered, he stood perfectly composed, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. His black hair was swept back precisely, and even from across the cafe, she could see the quality of his leather shoes. Everything about him spoke of money, of power, of a world she could only observe from the outside. The barista behind the counter cleared her throat loudly. The first card declined. The man tried another. Declined again. A third card produced the same result. Vanessa watched his shoulders tense slightly, the only sign that this perfect facade was cracking. I wonder where you all are watching from today, she thought, imagining people from different places experiencing their own moments of unexpected kindness. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes in our lives, and we never know when we might be the person someone needs most. The man reached for what appeared to be his final card. The barista tapped it against the machine with growing impatience. Other customers began to notice, shifting uncomfortably in line behind him. Declined. The word seemed to hang in the air like an accusation. "Excuse me," the barista said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet cafe. "You need to either pay for your order or move aside for other customers." Vanessa saw the man's jaw tighten. His hands moved to his pockets, searching for something that clearly was not there. The people behind him began to murmur. Someone made a disgusted sound. The humiliation radiating from his rigid posture made something in her chest ache. She was on her feet before conscious thought caught up with action. Her sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as she approached the counter, her precious $23 clutched in her fist. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was insane. She had exactly enough money to buy herself lunch today and maybe a cheap dinner. Tomorrow she would eat whatever remained in her nearly empty cabinets. "I will take care of his order," she said quietly to the barista. The man turned to look at her then, and she was struck by his eyes. Dark brown, intelligent, but carrying something that looked almost like pain. Up close, she could see he was older than she had first assumed, maybe early 40s, with subtle lines around those remarkable eyes that spoke of experiences she could not imagine. "You do not need to do this," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that made each word sound carefully chosen. "It is already done," Vanessa replied, handing her money to the barista before he could protest further. The total was $18.75. She would have exactly $4.72 left. Enough for coffee tomorrow morning, if she was careful. The barista processed the payment with visible confusion, glancing between them as if trying to understand the dynamics of what had just happened. The man accepted his order, a sandwich and coffee that represented more than half of Vanessa's remaining money, with a gravity that seemed disproportionate to the simple transaction. "What is your name?" he asked as they stepped away from the counter together. "Vanessa Sterling." He repeated it carefully, as if committing it to memory. "I am Park Sante. What you have done today, Miss Sterling, I will remember this kindness. I will remember it for a very long time." There was something in his tone that made the simple statement sound like a vow. Not just gratitude, but something deeper and more binding. It made her slightly uncomfortable, as if she had accidentally triggered something much larger than a paid lunch bill. "It was nothing," she said, meaning it. "Just paying it forward. Someone helped me once when I needed it." Park Sante studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She had the strange feeling that he was memorizing not just her name, but everything about this moment. The way she stood, the worn edges of her uniform from elite cleaning services, the careful way she had counted her money before approaching. "Nothing," he repeated slowly, as if testing the word. "No, Miss Sterling. Nothing is when someone walks past. Nothing is when someone pretends not to see. What you did is something else entirely. He reached into his jacket, and for a moment she wondered if he would try to pay her back. But instead, he simply pulled out his phone. After making what sounded like a brief call in a language she did not recognize, he tucked the device away and looked at her again. "I hope our paths cross again, Vanessa Sterling." The way he said it made it sound less like hope and more like certainty. Then he was walking away, moving through the cafe with a fluid confidence that made other people unconsciously step aside. She watched him disappear into the crowd outside, taking with him the strangest encounter she had experienced in years. Back at her table, she stared at the $4.72 that remained of her money. Tomorrow would be challenging, but somehow she felt no regret. Her mother had always taught her that kindness was never wasted, that it came back to you in ways you could never predict. At the time, she had thought it was just something parents said to make children behave. Now, watching the space where Park Sante had vanished into the bustling street, she wondered if her mother might have been more right than she knew. The rest of her lunch break passed quietly. She made the $4 stretch to cover a small soup, savoring each spoonful while mentally planning how to make her pantry supplies last until payday. It would require creativity and careful rationing, but she had managed worse situations before. When she returned to Elite Cleaning Services, her supervisor barely looked up from his paperwork. The afternoon shift would take her to 3 different office buildings, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces while invisible to the people whose messes she cleaned. It was honest work that allowed her to pay rent and utilities, but it left her exhausted and anonymous. As she loaded cleaning supplies into her cart, Vanessa found herself thinking about Park Sante's eyes and the strange weight of his gratitude. Most people said thank you and moved on with their lives. He had spoken like someone making a sacred promise, like someone for whom debts and favors carried consequences she could not begin to understand. She shook her head, focusing on the task ahead. In her world, $23 was a significant sum. In his world, judging by his clothes and bearing, it was probably less than he spent on coffee. The encounter would fade from his memories soon enough, absorbed into the background noise of countless daily interactions. By evening, she had almost convinced herself that this was true. 3 days later, Vanessa pushed through the glass doors of the Meridian Tower after completing her evening cleaning shift. Her shoulders ached from 6 hours of scrubbing floors and emptying waste baskets, and her feet throbbed in the cheap sneakers that needed replacing months ago. The lobby echoed with the hollow sound of her footsteps as security guards nodded their familiar acknowledgement. Outside, downtown Los Angeles hummed with its usual evening energy. Office workers hurried past toward parking garages and metro stations, everyone eager to escape the concrete maze and return to their real lives. Vanessa pulled her jacket tighter against the October chill and began the familiar walk to the bus stop 3 blocks away. She made it exactly half a block before she noticed something was wrong. The street ahead was blocked, not by construction or an accident, but by a line of vehicles that looked like they belonged in a presidential motorcade. 5 black SUVs with tinted windows sat perfectly aligned along the curb, their engines running and hazard lights flashing. Pedestrians had gathered on both sides of the sidewalk, phones out, recording whatever spectacle was unfolding. Vanessa slowed her pace, uncertain whether to continue forward or find an alternate route. The vehicles were clearly expensive, the kind of luxury transportation that carried celebrities or politicians. She had no desire to get caught up in whatever media circus was happening. Then the middle SUV's rear door opened. Park Sante stepped out, and Vanessa's world tilted sideways. He was dressed differently than he had been at the cafe. Instead of the business suit, he wore dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow managed to look both casual and incredibly expensive. But it was not his clothes that made her stomach drop. It was the way 4 large men in matching dark suits immediately flanked him, their eyes scanning the growing crowd with professional alertness. His gaze found her across the sea of curious onlookers, and his face lit up with genuine pleasure. He said something to the man on his right, who nodded and began clearing a path through the crowd. People stepped aside without question, perhaps sensing something that made argument inadvisable. "Miss Sterling," Park Sante called out as he approached, his voice carrying easily over the street noise. "I told you our paths would cross again." Vanessa stood frozen as he walked toward her, the 4 men maintaining perfect formation around him. Up close, she could see the quality of their coordination, the way their heads moved in constant surveillance patterns, the subtle bulges under their jackets that suggested they were armed. These were not chauffeurs or assistants. These were bodyguards. "What is this?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my way of saying thank you properly," he replied, gesturing toward the convoy with a smile that seemed almost boyish despite the intimidating circumstances. "I have been thinking about your kindness for 3 days, Miss Sterling. It has been troubling me greatly." "Troubling you?" she repeated, unsure whether to laugh or run. "Yes, troubling me. You see, I was raised to believe that debts must be repaid. All debts, no matter how small they might seem to others. My mother taught me this before she died. She said that ignoring kindness was the same as spitting on it, and that a man who cannot honor his obligations is not worthy of respect." He paused, studying her face with that same intense attention she remembered from the cafe. Around them, the crowd continued to grow. Someone was definitely filming, and she could hear fragments of excited conversation as people tried to guess who this mysterious man might be. "You spent your last money on a stranger," Park Sante continued. "I have done some research, Miss Sterling. I know about your financial situation, about the difficult choices you make every day. What you did was not nothing. It was sacrifice." The way he said research made something cold settle in her chest. How exactly did one research someone's financial situation in 3 days? What kind of man had the resources and connections to investigate a cleaning lady's bank account? "I do not understand what you want from me," she said, taking a small step backward. "I want to give you something," he said simply. He gestured toward the lead SUV, and one of his men opened the front passenger door. Inside, she could see keys hanging from the ignition of what appeared to be a brand new vehicle. The leather interior gleamed under the street lights, and every surface spoke of luxury she had never experienced. "This is yours," Park Sante said. "Full ownership, registration in your name, insurance paid for the next 5 years. It is a small token of my appreciation for your kindness." Vanessa stared at the vehicle, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The SUV was probably worth more than she earned in 2 years. The insurance alone represented more money than she had ever possessed at one time. It was impossible. It was insane. "I cannot accept this," she said, her voice stronger now. "This is too much. Way too much for paying for someone's lunch." The crowd around them had grown larger, and she was becoming increasingly aware of the phones pointed in their direction. Whatever this was, it was being documented and would probably end up on social media within hours. The last thing she needed was to become some kind of internet sensation. Park Sante's expression grew serious. "You misunderstand the nature of what you did, Miss Sterling. In my world, there are very few people who would make the choice you made. Very few who would sacrifice their own comfort for a stranger's dignity. This is rare. This is precious." "Your world," she repeated. "What exactly is your world, Mr. Park?" His 4 companions shifted slightly, and she caught the briefest glimpse of one man touching something under his jacket. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. These men were prepared for trouble, and they were very good at their jobs. "I am a businessman," Park Sante said carefully. "I deal in complicated transactions with complicated people. The details are not important. What is important is that I understand the value of loyalty, of honor, of unexpected kindness from unexpected sources." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. "My mother died when I was 12 years old, Miss Sterling. She was a good woman who taught me that character matters more than wealth, that how you treat people reveals who you really are. When I saw you step forward in that cafe, when I saw you give up your last money for someone you did not know, I saw her values in action." His eyes held genuine emotion, and for a moment she forgot about the bodyguards and the crowd and the impossibility of the situation. This was a man talking about his mother, about lessons learned and promises kept. "But I still cannot accept the car," she said gently. "It is too much. It changes the meaning of what happened." "Then what can I give you?" he asked, and she heard real frustration in his voice. "How can I balance this debt?" "You already have," she told him. "By remembering it, by thinking it mattered. That is enough." Park Sante stared at her for a long moment, and she had the feeling he was seeing something that surprised him. Around them, the crowd continued to watch and record, waiting for some dramatic conclusion to whatever strange theater they were witnessing. "You are remarkable," he said finally. Most people would have taken the car and asked for more. You refuse what others would kill for. This makes the debt larger, not smaller. Before she could respond, one of his men approached and spoke quietly in his ear. Park Sante nodded and turned back to her. I must go now, but this conversation is not finished. I will find another way to honor what you have done, Miss Sterling. Something that you will accept, something that matches the magnitude of your character. He pulled a business card from his jacket and pressed it into her hand. The cardstock was thick and expensive, with only a phone number embossed in elegant script. When you are ready to let me balance this debt properly, call that number. Someone will always answer, any time of day or night. Promise me you will remember that. Before she could protest again, he was walking back toward his SUV. His bodyguards fell into formation around him with military precision. The crowd parted to let them pass, and within moments all 5 vehicles were pulling away from the curb with the smooth coordination of a practiced operation. Vanessa stood alone on the sidewalk, clutching the business card and staring after the disappearing convoy. Around her, the crowd began to disperse, people drifting back to their own lives while chattering excitedly about what they had witnessed. She looked down at the card in her hand. No name, no business identification, just a phone number that somehow felt like it connected to something vast and powerful and completely beyond her understanding. Whatever Park Sante's world really was, she had just been invited to step inside it. The question that followed her all the way home was whether that invitation was a blessing or a warning. The photographs were grainy but unmistakable. Vanessa Sterling accepting a business card from Park Sante. Vanessa Sterling standing beside a luxury SUV worth more than most people earned in 5 years. Vanessa Sterling engaged in what appeared to be intimate conversation with one of the most powerful men in the Korean-American organized crime community. Kong Jin-soo spread the surveillance images across his desk like tarot cards revealing an unwelcome future. His lieutenant, Marcus Chun, stood quietly beside him, waiting for instructions. The photos had been taken from multiple angles by 3 different teams, all capturing the same impossible scene playing out on a busy downtown street. How long have they been together? Kong asked, his voice carrying the careful neutrality he used when trying to control his temper. Unknown, sir. This is the first time our surveillance has captured them in public. But the interaction suggests familiarity. Comfort level. This is not a business meeting. Kong studied the images again, focusing on body language and positioning. Park Sante was standing closer to the woman than he would to a stranger. His bodyguards had allowed her within their protective perimeter. Most telling of all, he had personally handed her something, a gesture that suggested trust. Who is she? Kong asked. Marcus consulted his tablet. Vanessa Sterling, 28 years old, works for Elite Cleaning Services. Lives alone in a studio apartment in Koreatown. No criminal record, no political connections, no obvious value to anyone in our business. On paper, she is nobody. Kong Jin-soo had not survived 15 years in organized crime by dismissing people as nobody. In his experience, the individuals who appeared to have no value were often the most dangerous. They had nothing to lose, which made them unpredictable. They could move through society without attracting attention, which made them perfect for surveillance or assassination. More concerning was the question of why Park Sante, a man famous for his paranoia and careful isolation, would expose himself publicly to protect or court someone from outside his organization. Kong had been watching Sante for 3 years, looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, ways to destabilize his rival's growing influence. This woman represented the first genuine opening he had discovered. I want to know everything about her, Kong told Marcus. Where she goes, what she does, who she talks to. I want to know her daily routine better than she knows it herself. And I want to know exactly what she means to Park Sante. Marcus nodded and left to implement the surveillance orders. Kong remained alone with the photographs, studying them under his desk lamp like an archaeologist examining ancient artifacts. Somewhere in these images was the key to destroying Park Sante's organization, and Kong intended to find it. 2 days later, Vanessa noticed the feeling for the first time. It was subtle, just a prickle at the back of her neck as she waited for the bus after her morning shift. The sensation of being watched, of eyes following her movement with more attention than casual interest warranted. She turned to scan the street behind her, but saw only the usual collection of commuters, and early shoppers. A businessman reading a newspaper. A woman walking a small dog. Two men in hoodies sitting on a bench sharing what looked like coffee and conversation. Nothing suspicious, nothing that should have triggered her instincts. But the feeling persisted during her bus ride downtown. In the reflection of the window, she caught glimpses of a dark sedan that seemed to be following the same route, staying exactly 3 cars behind through multiple traffic lights and turns. When she got off at her stop, the sedan drove past without slowing, and she convinced herself she was being paranoid. The feeling intensified over the next week. The same faces began appearing in different locations. The businessman with the newspaper showed up at a coffee shop 6 blocks from her apartment. One of the men from the bench was browsing magazines at the convenience store where she bought groceries. The coincidences accumulated like gathering storm clouds. On Thursday evening, she came home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Vanessa stood in the hallway for several minutes, key in hand, trying to remember if she might have failed to lock the door properly that morning. She was always careful about security, especially living alone in a neighborhood that could be rough after dark. But she had been distracted lately, thinking about Park Sante and his mysterious business card and the impossible offer she had refused. She pushed the door open carefully and immediately knew someone had been inside. Nothing appeared to be missing. Her television still sat on its rickety stand. Her laptop remained on the kitchen table. Her jewelry box was undisturbed on the bedroom dresser. But someone had searched through her belongings with professional thoroughness. Dresser drawers were not quite closed properly. Books on her shelves were arranged differently. The couch cushions had been removed and replaced at slightly wrong angles. Most unsettling was what she found under her mattress. A small electronic device, black and rectangular, with a blinking red light that suggested active transmission. She had no idea what it was, but she understood its purpose. Someone wanted to monitor her movements, her conversations, her private life. Vanessa wrapped the device in aluminum foil and stuffed it deep into her kitchen garbage, though she suspected this would only delay rather than solve the problem. Then she sat on her violated bed and tried to understand what was happening to her. The business card. It had to be connected to Park Sante's business card. She pulled it from her purse and stared at the elegant phone number, wondering what kind of world she had accidentally entered. Park Sante had mentioned complicated transactions with complicated people. Were these complicated people now investigating her because they thought she was important to him? Her phone rang, startling her badly enough that she nearly dropped it. "Hello, Miss Sterling. This is Marcus Chun. I work for some people who are very interested in your recent activities." She had never heard the name before, but something in his tone made her stomach clench with fear. "I think you have the wrong number," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I do not think so. You were seen last week having a very interesting conversation with Park Sante. My employers are curious about the nature of your relationship with him." "I do not have a relationship with anyone by that name." Vanessa lied, though she suspected the lie was transparent. Marcus Chun laughed softly. "Miss Sterling, we have photographs. We have video. We know about the car he offered you, about the business card he gave you, about the very personal conversation you shared. What we do not know is what information you have provided him about our operations." "What operations?" she asked, genuinely confused. "I do not know anything about any operations." "Perhaps that is true," Marcus said, his tone suggesting he did not believe her. "Perhaps you are simply an innocent woman who got caught up in something beyond her understanding. If that is the case, then you have nothing to worry about. But if you are working with Park Sante against my employers, if you are providing him information or assistance, then your situation becomes much more complicated." The line went dead. Vanessa sat in her searched apartment, holding her phone and trying to process what had just happened. Someone believed she was involved in some kind of criminal conspiracy. Someone was watching her, following her, breaking into her home. And somehow, this was all connected to $23.47 she had spent on a stranger's lunch. She was still sitting there an hour later when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. Heavy, measured steps that stopped directly in front of her apartment. The doorknob rattled softly, as if someone was testing whether it was locked. Vanessa held her breath, moving silently toward the peephole. Through the distorted glass, she could see 2 men in dark clothing. One was speaking quietly into a phone, while the other examined her door frame with professional interest. She backed away from the door and grabbed her purse, looking for another way out. Her apartment was on the third floor, making the fire escape risky but possibly her only option. As she reached for the window, she heard the distinctive sound of metal scraping against metal. Someone was picking her lock. The window opened onto the fire escape with a squeal of protest. Vanessa climbed through as quietly as possible, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear her front door opening and voices discussing the best way to search her apartment. She made it down 2 flights before one of them spotted her through the window. "There," the voice shouted. "Fire escape." Vanessa abandoned stealth and ran, clattering down the metal stairs as fast as she dared. Behind her, she could hear the men climbing through her window in pursuit. She reached the alley and sprinted toward the street, hoping to reach a populated area before they caught her. She almost made it. The black sedan pulled across the alley mouth just as she reached the sidewalk, blocking her escape route. 2 more men got out, positioning themselves to cut off any attempt to run in either direction. The men from the fire escape appeared behind her, breathing hard but moving with calm efficiency. "Miss Sterling," one of them called. "We just want to talk. There is no need to make this difficult." Vanessa pressed her back against the brick wall of the adjacent building, looking for any possible escape route. The alley was narrow and dark, with dumpsters and parked cars limiting her options. The 4 men were spreading out to ensure she could not slip past them. "Please," she said, hating the way her voice shook. "I do not know what you think I have done, but you are making a mistake. I am just a cleaning lady. I do not know anything about anything." "Unfortunately, Miss Sterling," one of the men replied, "that is for our employer to determine. You are going to come with us now, and we are going to have a more detailed conversation about your relationship with Park Sante." They started moving toward her, and Vanessa realized with crystal clarity that she was about to disappear. Whatever these men wanted, whatever they thought she knew, they were not going to let her walk away from this alley. She was going to become another unsolved missing person case, another name on a police report that would never be investigated seriously enough to find answers. Then the streetlight at the alley mouth exploded in a shower of sparks. The gunshot echoed off the brick walls like thunder, and suddenly everyone was moving. The 4 men who had been advancing on her were now scrambling for cover behind cars and dumpsters, shouting instructions to each other in Korean. Vanessa dropped to the ground and crawled toward the nearest dumpster, trying to make herself as small as possible. More shots rang out, precise and calculated, each one eliminating a defensive position or forcing the men to abandon cover. Someone was systematically dismantling the trap they had set for her, and doing it with military precision. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had started. In the sudden silence, Vanessa could hear footsteps approaching from the street, measured and confident. A voice she recognized called out in accented English. "Miss Sterling, this is James Park. I work for someone who is very concerned about your safety. Please stay down until I confirm the area is secure." Within minutes, it was over. The 4 men were face down on the asphalt with their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Their weapons had been collected, and their sedan was blocking the alley with 3 flat tires and a spider-webbed windshield. James Park appeared beside her dumpster, a compact man in his 30s wearing tactical gear and carrying what looked like a very expensive rifle. His face was calm and professional, as if rescuing people from kidnappers was something he did every Tuesday evening. "Are you injured?" he asked, offering her a hand up. "No," she managed to say. "Scared, but not hurt." "Who are you?" "I am part of Mr. Park Sante's security team," he replied. "We have been maintaining protective surveillance since your public meeting last week. It is fortunate that we were in position when Kong Jin-soo's people decided to escalate their interest in you." "Kong Jin-soo," she repeated. "Who is Kong Jin-soo?" James Park's expression grew serious. "Someone you do not want to meet, Miss Sterling. Someone who now considers you a valuable asset in his war against my employer. I am afraid your life just became much more complicated." The second black SUV arrived as James Park was securing the alley. Vanessa watched from behind the dumpster as the vehicle pulled up with the same smooth precision she remembered from downtown, its tinted windows revealing nothing of who sat inside. The rear door opened and Park Sante stepped out, his face carrying an expression she had never seen before. Rage. Cold, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. He surveyed the scene with the efficiency of someone accustomed to violence. His eyes moved from the zip-tied men on the asphalt to the disabled sedan to Vanessa crouched beside the dumpster, cataloging every detail of what had nearly happened. When he spoke to James Park, his voice carried an authority that made it clear why armed men followed his orders without question. How many were there, he asked. 4 on site, plus surveillance teams we eliminated during approach, James replied. Marcus Chin coordinated from remote location. Kong Jin-soo is escalating faster than we anticipated. Park Sante nodded and walked toward where Vanessa was slowly getting to her feet. Up close, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands remained perfectly steady despite whatever emotions were driving the fury in his eyes. When he reached her, his voice changed completely. Miss Sterling, I am deeply sorry this happened to you. This is my fault, and I take full responsibility for the danger my presence in your life has created. Your fault, she repeated, still trying to process what she had just experienced. How is this your fault? I do not even understand what just happened. Kong Jin-soo happened, Sante said, his voice hardening again. He is a rival businessman who believes that anything connected to me can be used as leverage against my organization. When he saw us together last week, when he saw me offer you a gift, he decided you might be valuable to him. Businessman, Vanessa said slowly. Is that really what you call yourself? Park Sante studied her face for a long moment. His expression suggested he was making some kind of calculation, weighing options she could not begin to understand. Behind him, James Park and 2 other men were efficiently cleaning up the alley, removing evidence of the confrontation with practiced speed. No, Sante said finally. That is not really what I call myself. Would you like to know what I really am, Miss Sterling? She found herself nodding before conscious thought could intervene. I run a Korean organized crime syndicate, he said with matter-of-fact directness. Money laundering, import-export operations that sometimes involve goods the government prefers not to cross borders, protection services for businesses that cannot rely on police assistance. I employ approximately 200 people across 3 states, and I am responsible for territory worth several $1 million in annual revenue. He paused, watching her reaction. Vanessa felt like the ground beneath her feet had shifted again, leaving her standing on something fundamentally unstable. I am telling you this because Kong Jin-soo will not stop targeting you now. He believes you have value to me, and in his world that makes you a weapon he can use. The only way to keep you safe is to bring you under my protection until we can resolve this situation. Vanessa looked around the alley, at the men with zip-tied hands and the tactical gear scattered across the asphalt. This was not her world. This was not her life. 3 weeks ago, her biggest concern had been stretching $23 until payday. What if I say no, she asked. What if I just want to go back to my normal life? Then Kong Jin-soo will kidnap you within 48 hours, Park Sante replied without hesitation. He will torture you for information about my operations, my people, my weaknesses. When you convince him that you genuinely know nothing, he will kill you and leave your body somewhere I will find it, along with a message explaining that anyone connected to me will suffer the same fate. The clinical way he described her potential death made something cold settle in her stomach. This was not theoretical danger. This was not drama or exaggeration. This man was explaining the probable consequences of her choices with the calm expertise of someone who had seen exactly this scenario play out before. So I do not really have a choice, she said. You have a choice, Miss Sterling. You can trust me to protect you, or you can take your chances with Kong Jin-soo. But the choice to return to your previous life disappeared the moment you paid for my lunch. James Park approached and spoke quietly to Sante in Korean. Whatever he said caused Sante's expression to tighten with renewed concern. We need to move, Sante told her. Kong will have backup teams en route, and this location is no longer secure. Will you come with me voluntarily, or do I need to insist? The question was politely phrased, but Vanessa understood that refusal was not really an option. She was already in this world whether she wanted to be or not. The only remaining question was whether she would cooperate with her protection or resist it. I will come with you, she said. The drive through Los Angeles took 40 minutes, though Vanessa suspected they were taking an indirect route to avoid surveillance. She sat in the back seat next to Park Sante, acutely aware of the 2 armed men in the front and the escort vehicles ahead and behind them. Through the tinted windows, She watched the city transform from her familiar neighborhood to increasingly upscale areas she had only seen in magazines. "Tell me about Kong Jin-soo," she said as they climbed into the hills above downtown. "Kong Jin-soo is what happens when ambition exceeds wisdom," Sante replied. "He runs a smaller organization that specializes in human trafficking and drug distribution. 5 years ago, he made the mistake of trying to expand into my territory without permission. Since then, we have been engaged in what you might call an extended negotiation over boundaries and respect." "You mean a war?" she said. "I mean a careful dance where neither of us can afford to escalate beyond certain limits," Sante corrected. "Full war would attract federal attention that would destroy both our organizations. So we probe for weaknesses, we test defenses, we look for advantages that do not require open violence. You have unfortunately become one of those potential advantages." The convoy turned through massive iron gates into what looked like a private estate. Vanessa stared through the window at manicured gardens and a fountain that probably cost more than her annual salary. The driveway curved through perfectly landscaped grounds toward a house that looked more like a museum than a residence. "This is where you live?" she asked. "This is one of where I live," Sante replied. "I maintain several properties for security reasons. This one offers the best protection while we determine how to resolve your situation." The SUV stopped in front of a glass and steel structure that seemed to hang off the hillside, offering panoramic views of the city below. Even in the darkness, Vanessa could see that every detail had been designed by someone with unlimited resources and sophisticated taste. This was not just wealth. This was wealth with vision. Inside, the penthouse felt more like an art gallery than a home. Original paintings hung on walls of floor-to-ceiling glass. Sculptures that belonged in museums occupied alcoves designed specifically for their display. The furniture looked like it had been selected by someone who understood the difference between expensive and valuable. Park Sante led her to a living room that looked out over the lights of Los Angeles spread below like a circuit board. A woman in her 50s appeared with tea service and disappeared without speaking. The entire environment radiated quiet luxury and careful security. "This is beautiful," Vanessa said, because something needed to be said about the impossible elegance surrounding them. "Thank you," Sante replied, settling into a chair across from her. "My mother always said that beauty was one of the few things that could justify wealth. She believed that if you were fortunate enough to have resources, you had an obligation to create something worthy of them." He poured tea with practiced grace, and Vanessa found herself studying his hands. They were not the soft hands of someone who had never worked. There were small scars across his knuckles, calluses that spoke of physical training, a precision of movement that suggested both martial arts and weapons familiarity. "Tell me about your mother," she said, accepting the delicate porcelain cup. "She died when I was 12, as I mentioned before. Cancer that we could not afford to treat properly. By the time we found doctors who would see us without insurance, it was too late. She spent her last months teaching me that character was the only thing that could not be taken away, that kindness was the only true measure of a person's worth." He paused, looking out at the city lights. "When I saw you step forward in that cafe, when I saw you sacrifice your own comfort for someone you did not know, I saw her values in action. It reminded me why I try to conduct my business with honor, even in a world where honor is often seen as weakness." Vanessa sipped her tea, thinking about the contrast between his words and his world. Honor in organized crime seemed like a contradiction, yet she could hear genuine emotion in his voice when he spoke about his mother's teachings. "How do you reconcile it?" she asked. "Living this way while trying to honor someone who taught you kindness?" "By choosing my enemies carefully," he replied. "By protecting people who cannot protect themselves. By ensuring that my organization operates with rules, with limits, with respect for those who deserve respect. Kong Jin-soo traffics children, Miss Sterling. He sells young girls to men who destroy them. I launder money for casino owners and art dealers who want to avoid certain taxes. We are not the same." The distinction mattered to him, she could see. Whatever moral framework he had constructed to justify his life, it required clear boundaries between acceptable and unacceptable methods. She found herself wondering whether those boundaries were real or simply convenient. "What happens now?" she asked. Now you are under the protection of my organization until we can eliminate the threat Kong Jin-soo represents, Sante said. You will have a security detail whenever you leave this building. Your movements will be coordinated with my people to ensure your safety. Your job at Elite Cleaning Services has been temporarily covered by someone from my payroll. You cannot just take over my life, she protested. I am not taking over your life, Miss Sterling. I am keeping you alive. There is a difference, though I understand the distinction may not be immediately apparent. Despite everything, despite the impossible circumstances and the criminal revelation and the complete upheaval of everything she thought she knew about the world, Vanessa found herself almost smiling at his careful formality. You can call me Vanessa, she said. If I am going to be under your protection, we probably do not need to maintain quite so much distance. Park Sante looked surprised, then pleased. Thank you, Vanessa. You can call me Sante. Most people do. Over the following days, she began to understand the scope of his organization. Men and women appeared at various times to report on surveillance, transportation, financial matters, and what they carefully referred to as operational security. All of them treated Sante with a combination of respect and genuine affection that suggested he was more than just a boss to them. She also began to understand Kong Jin-soo's escalation. Her supervisor at Elite Cleaning Services called to inform her that someone had broken into the office and destroyed employee records. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kim, mentioned that strange men had been asking questions about her daily routine. The corner market where she bought groceries was robbed, though nothing was actually stolen. The message was clear. Kong Jin-soo could reach anyone connected to her, anywhere, anytime. Her protection came at the cost of everyone else's safety. On the fourth evening, as they shared dinner on the terrace overlooking the city, Vanessa found herself studying Sante's profile in the candlelight. Somewhere between the fear and the luxury and the gradual understanding of his world, she had begun to see him as a person rather than a symbol of everything foreign to her experience. You are staring, he said without looking away from the view. I am thinking, she replied, about how different you are from what I expected. Different how? Gentler, she said, more thoughtful. When you told me you ran a criminal organization, I expected someone harder. More frightening. I can be frightening when the situation requires it, Sante said, turning to meet her eyes. But frightening people who do not deserve to be frightened serves no purpose. You deserve protection, not intimidation. The way he said it, with quiet certainty and complete focus on her face, made something warm settle in her chest. This was a man who had chosen to see her as worthy of care, despite coming from a world where such choices probably carried significant risk. What happens when this is over? She asked. When Kong Jin-soo is no longer a threat. That depends, Sante replied. On what? On whether you decide that what we have built here is worth preserving, he said. On whether you can imagine a life that includes both the safety I can provide and the moral compromises my world requires. On whether you believe that two people from very different backgrounds can find something genuine together. He reached across the small table and covered her hand with his. The touch was gentle, careful, asking permission rather than demanding acceptance. I am not asking for an answer tonight, Vanessa. I am simply telling you that the choice will be yours to make when you are ready to make it. Looking down at their joined hands, Vanessa realized that somewhere in the past 4 days, she had begun to fall in love with a man whose world she still barely understood. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like the first genuinely hopeful thing that had happened since she had paid for a stranger's lunch. Kong Jin-soo stood at the windows of his downtown office, watching the morning traffic flow through the intersection 20 stories below. The past week had been a series of failures that were rapidly eroding his authority within his own organization. 4 of his best men captured during a simple surveillance operation. His intimidation tactics against Vanessa Sterling's associates producing no useful intelligence. Park Sante's protective measures proving more sophisticated than anticipated. Most concerning was the growing impatience of his financial backers. The Korean businessmen who funded his operations had made their expectations clear. Either produce results against Park Sante or face the consequences of disappointing very dangerous investors. Kong could not afford another failed strategy. Marcus Chin entered the office carrying a tablet and wearing the careful expression of someone delivering unwelcome news. The Sterling woman has not left Sante's penthouse in 6 days, Marcus reported. Full security detail whenever she appears on the grounds. Counter-surveillance teams that eliminated our observation posts. We cannot get close enough for a traditional extraction. Kong turned from the window, his patience finally exhausted. Then we do not use traditional methods. What other options do we have? Marcus consulted his tablet. Elite Cleaning Services received a contract to perform deep cleaning at the Meridian Medical Center tomorrow morning. Large facility, multiple access points, civilian environment where security presence would be conspicuous. And this helps us how? Kong asked. The contract was arranged through Sterling's former supervisor, who believes she is returning to work after a family emergency. If we can convince Sante's people that she has insisted on fulfilling this obligation, if we can make it seem like she is forcing their hand by demanding to return to her normal routine, they might allow a reduced security presence. Kong considered the proposal. It was risky, requiring coordination and timing that left multiple points of failure. But it also offered the kind of opportunity that had been absent from their previous approaches. Do it, he decided. But this time we take no chances. Full team, multiple extraction routes, and immediate transport to the warehouse. Once we have her, Park Sante will discover exactly how much his new girlfriend means to him. At the penthouse, Vanessa paced the length of the living room for the dozenth time that morning, restless energy making it impossible to sit still. A week of protection had become a week of imprisonment, despite the luxury of her surroundings and the consideration of her guards. She was safe, she was comfortable, and she was slowly going insane from the enforced inactivity. Sante found her standing at the windows, staring down at the city she could see but not access. "You are thinking about leaving," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "I am thinking about living," she replied without turning around. "This is beautiful, this is safe, but this is not life. This is hiding." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence without the pressure of physical contact. "Kong Jin-soo has increased his surveillance in the past 48 hours, Sante said quietly. "My intelligence sources indicate he is planning something desperate. Now is not the time to take unnecessary risks." "When is the time?" Vanessa asked, finally turning to face him. "When does this end? When do I get to go back to having a life instead of being a problem that needs solving?" The questions hit harder than she intended, and she could see the impact in his expression. Over the past week, their relationship had deepened into something that felt genuine and significant, but it existed in a bubble of artificial circumstances. She had begun to wonder whether what she felt for him was real or simply the psychological effect of shared danger and forced proximity. "I received a call this morning," she continued. "Elite Cleaning Services has a contract at Meridian Medical Center. My supervisor specifically requested me because the client asked for experienced personnel. It is one day, a few hours, completely public environment." Sante's expression tightened immediately. "Absolutely not. The timing is too convenient. The circumstances too perfect. This has Kong Jin-soo written all over it. So I am supposed to spend the rest of my life afraid to work, afraid to leave, afraid to be myself because some criminal thinks I might be useful to him? That is not protection, Sante. That is just a different kind of prison." She could see him struggling between his protective instincts and his understanding of her frustration. The past week had shown her many sides of his character, including his tendency to solve problems through control and overwhelming force. But this was not a problem that could be solved by adding more security or building higher walls. "If you insist on doing this," he said finally, "then we do it properly. Full security detail, complete reconnaissance, controlled entry and exit routes. And you wear a tracking device that allows us to monitor your location at all times." Vanessa wanted to argue, wanted to insist on some semblance of normal independence. But she could see the genuine fear in his eyes, the way his hands had unconsciously clenched into fists at the thought of her being exposed to danger. This man who commanded armed followers and operated without apparent fear was terrified of something happening to her. "Okay," she agreed. "Full security, proper precautions, tracking device. But I do the job, and I do it myself. I need to feel like I still exist as a person, not just as your responsibility." The Meridian Medical Center occupied 6 floors of a downtown high-rise, with administrative offices, surgical suites, and patient care facilities that required specialized cleaning protocols. Vanessa arrived at 7 in the morning with her security detail, disguised as additional cleaning staff, and a backup team positioned throughout the building. For 3 hours, everything proceeded normally. She cleaned exam rooms and sterilized equipment under the watchful eyes of guards who managed to appear busy while maintaining perfect situational awareness. The familiar routine of work felt like returning to herself after a week of being someone else's protected asset. The attack came during her lunch break, in the building's underground parking garage. Vanessa was walking toward the stairwell when the lights went out. Emergency illumination kicked in seconds later, casting everything in harsh red shadows that made depth perception difficult. She heard James Park's voice over the radio, sharp and urgent, reporting multiple vehicles entering the garage through access points that should have been secured. Then the shooting started. The gunfire echoed off concrete walls and low ceilings, creating a disorienting cacophony that made it impossible to determine direction or distance. Vanessa dropped behind a parked car as instructed, fumbling for the panic button on her tracking device while trying to stay low and invisible. James Park appeared beside her, breathing hard and scanning their surroundings with professional intensity. 6 vehicles, at least 15 men, he reported into his radio. They have jammers blocking our communications and smoke grenades limiting visibility. This is a full-scale extraction operation. Above the noise of gunfire, she heard someone calling her name in accented English. Kong Jin-soo himself, she realized, directing the operation personally. Miss Sterling, the voice echoed through the garage. We can do this easily, or we can do this hard. Your security detail is outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender yourself, and they live. Force us to take you, and some of them die unnecessarily. James Park grabbed her shoulder, his grip urgent. We can hold them until reinforcements arrive, he said. Mr. Park Sante is en route with full response team. Estimated arrival 12 minutes. 12 minutes felt like 12 hours as the gunfight intensified around them. Vanessa could hear men moving through the garage, methodically clearing hiding places and eliminating defensive positions. Her security detail was fighting with professional competence, but Kong Jin-soo had brought overwhelming force to ensure success. The smoke grenade landed 3 feet from their position. James Park was moving before the canister hit the ground, pulling her toward an emergency exit as thick gray smoke billowed around them. But the exit was blocked by men in tactical gear who had been waiting for exactly this escape attempt. That was when she understood that Kong Jin-soo had prepared for every contingency, every possible response, every strategy her protectors might employ. This was not a desperate gamble. This was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to succeed regardless of how Sante's people responded. James Park went down fighting, taking 3 men with him before a taser dropped him to the concrete. Vanessa found herself surrounded by armed figures in the choking smoke, rough hands grabbing her arms and dragging her toward a waiting van. The last thing she heard before the hood went over her head was Kong Jin-soo's satisfied voice speaking into a phone. Tell Park Sante I have his girlfriend, Kong said. Tell him I will contact him in 6 hours with terms for her return. Tell him to consider very carefully how much she is worth to him. The warehouse was exactly what she had expected. Concrete floors, metal walls, industrial lighting that cast harsh shadows everywhere. Kong Jin-soo had her secured to a chair in what appeared to be a makeshift office, complete with desk and filing cabinets that suggested this was more than a temporary facility. He was younger than she had anticipated, perhaps 40, with the kind of lean build and careful grooming that suggested vanity as much as success. When he spoke, his English was precise and unaccented, the product of expensive education rather than street experience. Miss Sterling, welcome to my temporary headquarters. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but your boyfriend has made subtlety impossible. He is not my boyfriend, Vanessa said, testing the zip ties that secured her wrists. Kong smiled, settling into the chair across from her. Perhaps not in the conventional sense, but you are certainly important enough to him that he is willing to risk significant resources for your protection. That makes you valuable to me regardless of the precise nature of your relationship. He opened a file folder on the desk and spread several documents in front of her. Financial records, bank statements, employment history stretching back 5 years. Someone had conducted a thorough investigation into every aspect of her background. You studied accounting and finance at UCLA before family circumstances forced you to leave school, Kong read from the file. You worked as a bookkeeper for 3 different companies before accepting employment with Elite Cleaning Services. Your academic record indicates considerable aptitude for complex financial analysis. What does that have to do with anything? Vanessa asked, though she was beginning to suspect where this conversation was leading. Park Sante operates a sophisticated money laundering network, Kong explained. Casino revenues, art sales, real estate transactions that require expert analysis to structure properly. Someone with your background could provide extremely valuable insights into his financial operations. I do not know anything about his finances, she said truthfully. Perhaps not yet, Kong replied. But you will. You see, Miss Sterling, this is not just about using you as leverage against Park Sante. This is about recruiting you to provide ongoing intelligence about his organization. Your access, your skills, your apparent insignificance make you the perfect asset. He leaned forward, his voice taking on a persuasive tone. I am prepared to offer you $200,000 for 6 months of financial intelligence about Park Sante's operations. Bank account information, transaction records, client lists, investment strategies. Everything you can access as his trusted companion. And if I refuse, she asked, then you die here, tonight, and Park Sante receives your body with a message explaining the cost of interfering with my business interests. But I do not think you will refuse, Miss Sterling. I think you are intelligent enough to recognize an opportunity when it presents itself. Before she could respond, an explosion somewhere in the building shook the walls and rattled the filing cabinets. Kong Jin-soo was on his feet immediately, pulling a pistol from his desk drawer and moving toward the door. Another explosion, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of automatic weapons fire. Kong grabbed his radio and began barking orders in rapid Korean, but the responses he received seemed to increase rather than diminish his agitation. How many men does he have? Kong demanded, switching back to English. Who? Vanessa asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Your boyfriend just brought what appears to be a small army to my warehouse, Kong said, his composure finally cracking. My security team is reporting armored vehicles, military-grade weapons, and coordination that suggests professional military training. Through the office window, Vanessa could see muzzle flashes and moving lights as the battle progressed through the warehouse complex. Whatever force Sante had brought, it was systematically eliminating Kong Jin-soo's defenses with devastating efficiency. Kong pulled out his phone and placed a call. Park Sante, I have your woman here with me. Call off your attack immediately, or I will kill her and throw her body into the street. Even from across the room, Vanessa could hear Sante's response. It was delivered in a voice so cold and controlled that it made her shiver. If you harm her in any way, Kong Jin-soo, I will not simply kill you. I will destroy everyone you have ever cared about, everything you have ever built, every person who has ever worked for you. I will erase your organization from existence and make sure that no one remembers you ever lived. The line went dead. Kong stared at the phone for several seconds, then turned back to Vanessa with an expression of genuine surprise. He really does care about you, Kong said. I have never heard Park Sante threaten complete war over anything. You must be very special to him. The gunfire was getting closer. Through the office window, she could see Kong's men falling back toward the center of the building, their defensive perimeter collapsing under sustained assault. Kong Jin-soo made one final calculation, weighing his options against the approaching sound of Sante's forces. Then he raised his pistol and pointed it directly at her. If I cannot have what I want, he said, then neither can he. The office door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and smoke. Sante appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel, flanked by men in tactical gear and carrying a rifle that looked like it belonged on a battlefield. His eyes found Kong Jin-soo and the gun pointed at Vanessa, and his expression became something that would haunt her dreams. You have 3 seconds to drop that weapon, Sante said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. 3 seconds before I demonstrate exactly what happens to people who threaten what belongs to me. Kong Jin-soo looked at Sante, looked at the rifle pointed at his chest, looked at the tactical team prepared to turn him into a memory. Then he looked at Vanessa and seemed to come to a decision that surprised everyone. He dropped the gun. 2 hours later, Sitting in the back of an ambulance while a paramedic checked her for injuries, Vanessa watched Kong Jin-soo being loaded into a police car. Sante had used his connections to ensure that the authorities would handle Kong's arrest and prosecution, effectively ending his threat without requiring further violence. Sante appeared beside the ambulance, his tactical gear replaced by a simple black sweater that made him look almost normal again. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands hovering near her as if he wanted to touch her, but was afraid she might break. "I am okay," she said, catching his hands and holding them firmly. "Scared, angry, but okay." "I am sorry," he said, and she could see genuine anguish in his expression. "I should have listened to your concerns about the timing. I should have trusted my instincts about Kong's desperation. I almost lost you because I tried to balance your needs against safety considerations." "You did not almost lose me," Vanessa replied. "You came for me. You brought everything you had, and you came for me without hesitation. Do you understand what that means?" Sante looked confused by the question. "It means you love me," she continued. "Really love me. Not just the idea of protecting me or the debt you think you owe me. You were willing to go to war for me." He searched her eyes for several seconds, as if trying to determine whether she was making an observation or a request. "I do love you," he said finally. "More than I thought was possible, more than is probably wise, more than anything else in my life. Is that something you can accept, knowing what it means about the world we would share?" Vanessa thought about the past week, about the luxury and the protection and the careful balance between his criminal world and his personal values. She thought about his gentleness with her and his ruthless efficiency with Kong Jin-soo. Most of all, she thought about the way he had looked when he found her in that office, like someone who had almost lost everything that mattered. "Yes," she said, "I can accept it. I can accept you. All of you." When he kissed her there in the ambulance, with police cars and tactical vehicles scattered around them, it felt like the beginning of something impossible and inevitable and absolutely right. The penthouse felt different when they returned. The same panoramic views stretched across Los Angeles. The same carefully curated art decorated the walls, but somehow the space had transformed from sanctuary into home. Vanessa sat on the terrace in the early morning light, wrapped in one of Sante's sweaters and holding a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Sleep had been elusive. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself back in that warehouse office, staring down the barrel of Kong Jin-soo's pistol and understanding with crystal clarity that her life hung on decisions being made by men she barely knew. The rescue had been dramatic and complete, but the psychological aftermath was proving more challenging than the physical danger. Sante found her there as the sun climbed higher, bringing with it the warmth that would eventually burn off the morning marine layer. He moved quietly, setting a fresh cup of tea beside her before taking the chair across from the small table. "You did not sleep," he observed, his voice carrying the careful neutrality he used when he was worried about her emotional state. "Not much," she admitted. "Too many thoughts. Too many questions about what happens next." He studied her profile against the backdrop of the city below, and she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical presence. Over the past week, she had become attuned to his moods and expressions, learning to read the subtle signs that indicated whether he was thinking as a protector or as a man who cared about her. "I have been thinking about the same questions," Sante said. "About what kind of future we can build together, about whether what we have discovered is strong enough to survive outside these artificial circumstances." "Artificial circumstances," she repeated. "Is that what you call falling in love while one of us is hiding from kidnappers?" Despite everything, he smiled at her dry tone. "When you phrase it that way, it does sound rather unconventional." They sat quietly for several minutes, watching the city wake up below them. Traffic began to thicken on the freeways. Office buildings started to show signs of activity. Helicopters traced their morning news routes across the urban landscape. Somewhere down there, people were going about their normal lives, unaware that a small war had been fought and won in their vicinity just 12 hours ago. "I have something to offer you," Sante said finally. "Two options, actually, and the choice between them is entirely yours to make." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, setting it on the table between them with the ceremonial care of someone presenting a significant gift. "Option 1 is complete freedom," he continued. "New identity, financial security, relocation to wherever you choose to live. My organization has connections that can provide you with a completely clean start, far from Kong Jin-soo or anyone else who might connect you to this situation. Vanessa looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. The very existence of this option told her something important about how Sante viewed their relationship. He was willing to let her go, to sacrifice his own feelings for what he believed might be her best interests. And option two? She asked. Option two is partnership, Sante replied. Real partnership, not just protection or emotional connection, but genuine collaboration in building something meaningful together. He leaned forward, his expression growing more animated as he explained his vision. Kong Jin-soo was right about one thing. Vanessa, your financial skills could be extremely valuable, but not for the reasons he imagined. I have been looking for ways to legitimize significant portions of my organization's operations. Art galleries, import businesses, real estate development projects that could eventually operate completely within legal boundaries. She found herself listening with growing interest, despite the surreal nature of discussing legitimate business plans with a man who had just rescued her from a criminal rival. The challenge has always been finding someone with both the expertise to structure these transitions properly and the trustworthiness to handle sensitive financial information, Sante continued. Someone who understands that the goal is to move away from criminal activity rather than simply hide it more effectively. You are talking about laundering money, Vanessa said carefully. I am talking about earning money legally, Sante replied. Using the capital my organization has accumulated to create businesses that employ people honestly, that pay taxes appropriately, that contribute to their communities rather than simply extracting from them. He paused, gauging her reaction before continuing. It would not happen overnight, and it would require working with people who have complicated pasts. But it would be genuine transformation, genuine progress towards something my mother would have been proud to see. The reference to his mother was not accidental, she realized. This was his way of connecting their potential partnership to the values that mattered most to him, the moral framework he had constructed to justify his choices. What about the parts of your organization that cannot be legitimized? She asked. The protection services, the import operations that involve goods the government prefers not to cross borders? Those would continue under other management, with clear separation from the legitimate businesses we would develop together. You would never be involved in anything illegal, never asked to compromise your principles, never put at risk because of activities you had not chosen to support. Vanessa picked up the envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. Inside was freedom, safety, the opportunity to return to something resembling a normal life. Outside was partnership with a man she loved, involvement in projects that could potentially create genuine good, but also permanent association with a world that operated by rules she was still learning to understand. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Why are you offering me the choice? Why not simply ask me to stay, to be part of your life without the complications of business partnership? Sante was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer with the care he applied to all important decisions. Because I do not want to love someone I have to protect, he said finally. I want to love someone I can work with, someone who brings her own strengths to our relationship rather than simply accepting mine. You paid for my lunch when you had no reason to help me and no hope of getting anything in return. That tells me you understand the value of choosing to do the right thing even when it costs you something. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I want to find out what we can accomplish together, Vanessa. I want to discover what kind of future two people can build when they combine genuine care with complementary skills and shared values. But only if that is what you want as well. She thought about the past 2 weeks, about how dramatically her life had changed since that moment in Sunny Day Cafe. The scared, isolated woman who had counted her last $23 seemed like someone she remembered from years ago rather than days ago. But that woman's instincts, her willingness to help a stranger despite her own struggles, had led directly to this moment of choosing between safety and possibility. Sometimes I wonder how different things would be if I had just walked past you that day, she said. If I had minded my own business and let you deal with your declined cards alone. I think about that too, Sante replied. About all the small moments that led us here, all the choices that seemed insignificant at the time but changed everything. It makes me believe that some connections are inevitable, that some people are meant to find each other regardless of circumstances. He smiled, and she could see genuine happiness in his expression despite the serious nature of their conversation. It also makes me think that viewers watching our story might want to share their own moments when small acts of kindness change their lives in unexpected ways. There is something powerful about recognizing how much difference we can make for each other, often without even realizing it at the time. Vanessa set down the envelope and looked out over the city one more time. Somewhere down there was her old apartment, her old job, her old life of careful budgeting and quiet loneliness. That life had been honest and simple, but it had also been limited by circumstances beyond her control. Here, with Sante, was the possibility of something larger. Not just personal happiness, but the opportunity to use her skills for projects that could create genuine value, to be part of transformation rather than simply survival. "I want to see your business plans," she said. "I want to understand exactly what you are proposing, what the timelines look like, what the risks are, what success would actually mean." Sante's face lit up with relief and excitement. "You are considering the partnership option." "I am considering it seriously," she confirmed. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, complete transparency about all aspects of your organization, legitimate and otherwise. I need to understand exactly what world I would be entering, what associations I would have, what consequences my involvement might create." "Agreed," he said immediately. "Second, clear legal protection for everything I work on. If we are building legitimate businesses, they need to be genuinely legitimate, with proper documentation and appropriate regulatory compliance." "Also agreed." "Third," Vanessa continued, "if I do this, we do it as equals. Not as crime boss and grateful victim, not as protector and protected, but as partners who bring different strengths to shared goals." Sante reached for her other hand, holding both of hers across the small table. "Especially agreed," he said. "I would not want it any other way." Over the following hours, he showed her documents and plans that revealed the scope of his vision. Art galleries that could showcase legitimate artists while providing venues for high-end social events. Import businesses focused on Korean cultural items that could serve growing communities across the Western United States. Real estate development projects designed to create affordable housing while generating sustainable profits. The financial structures were complex but achievable, requiring exactly the kind of analytical skills she had developed during her truncated university education. More importantly, they were designed to create genuine value rather than simply moving money from one account to another. By evening, they had outlined a preliminary timeline for the first 3 ventures. Vanessa found herself energized by the intellectual challenge, by the opportunity to use her abilities for projects that could make a real difference. For the first time since leaving school, she felt like she was operating at her full potential. As they worked together on the terrace, surrounded by financial projections and legal documents, she realized that this felt more like her real life than anything she had experienced before. The combination of meaningful work, genuine partnership, and deep personal connection created a sense of completeness that had been absent from her previous existence. "When I was in that warehouse," she said as they finished reviewing the gallery proposal, "when Kong Jin-soo was explaining how he planned to use me against you, I understood something important." "What was that?" Sante asked, looking up from the import business projections. "I understood that I did not want to go back to being invisible, to living small and safe and alone. Not because safety is bad, but because I had discovered something worth taking risks for." She gestured toward the papers scattered across the table, toward the view of the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness, toward him. "This," she continued, "partnership, purpose, the possibility of building something meaningful with someone who sees value in what I can contribute. That is worth the complications, worth the uncertainties, worth stepping into a world I am still learning to navigate." Sante set aside his pen and gave her his complete attention. "Are you telling me you have made your decision?" he asked. "I am telling you that I choose partnership," Vanessa said. "I choose working together, building something together, facing whatever challenges come together. I choose you, and this, and us." When he kissed her this time, it felt different than it had in the ambulance. Less desperate, more certain. The kiss of 2 people who had chosen each other with full knowledge of what that choice meant, who were ready to discover what they could accomplish when they combined their strengths in service of shared dreams. Later, as they sat together watching the city lights spread to the horizon, Vanessa reflected on the journey from $23.47 to this moment of choosing her future. The path had been unexpected, dangerous, and transformative in ways she could never have imagined. But it had also been driven by a simple principle her mother had taught her long ago. When you see someone who needs help, you help them. When you have the opportunity to make a difference, you take it. When you find someone worth loving, you choose love over safety. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes, she thought, remembering the struggling man at the coffee shop counter who had turned out to be her perfect partner. Sometimes paying it forward means getting back more than you ever dreamed of giving. The future they would build together was still largely unwritten, but she was no longer afraid of its uncertainties. She was ready to discover what two people could accomplish when they combined genuine care with complementary skills and shared values. She was ready to find out what love looked like when it was built on partnership instead of protection, on choice instead of circumstance, on the decision to create something meaningful together rather than simply surviving apart. The city stretched out below them, full of possibilities and projects, and people who might benefit from the businesses they would build together. Tomorrow they would begin the real work of transformation, of turning criminal capital into legitimate opportunity, of proving that people could change when they found the right reasons and the right partners. Tonight, they simply sat together and planned their future, two people who had found each other through kindness and chosen to stay together through love.